In this video, we'll show you how to use event triggers in components. So for example, let's say you have a login form as a component and you don't want the same behavior depending on if this login form is on a dedicated login page or if it's in a pop-up in a modal. So if it's on a login page, you want to redirect the user to another page after a login success. But if it's inside a modal, you want to close that modal once the user has logged in successfully. You can do this by triggering a component event. Let's start by adding the default Xano login section onto our page. We could build our own from scratch, of course, but let's do it with a pre-made section. So inside that section, we have a card, and that card contains the logo, the text, a form container, and a message that is currently hidden. So let's turn this card into a component. When we select the card, we could create a new component here or click on here to transform the element into a component. So let's do this and call it login form. And let's create that here. Okay, now we are inside our component, but we could go back to the instance where we see the component inside a section. Or if we want to edit the component itself, we can go back to editing mode. All right, so in the component, we could add properties, variables, workflows, formulas. Here, the only thing we want to do is be able to trigger an event. So when a login is successful, we want the component to trigger an on success event. So let's call it on login success. Let's create this. And now on the form container inside our component, we can modify the workflow that comes by default with a component. So by default, it comes with a login with Xano action, which is mapped to an email input and password input. Now, because this was bound before we created the component, we just want to go to preview mode, type in our credentials, and make sure the binding works properly. So back in editing mode on our form container, let's have a look and see that here I don't have a current value, so I need to make sure I bind it to the component variable and not a variable that is outside the component. So now I'm confident that my bindings work because the current value reflects what I typed in preview mode. But because I am inside this component and I want a different behavior if the component is on a dedicated login page or if it's in a modal, instead of having a change page action, I will have a trigger event action. So here I will trigger on login success. And I'll choose this event that I just created. So the event I created on the component. I could leave the event value. I can type in something like yippee, you successfully logged in. That will depend on your use case and what you want to do. So now when the user submits the form, they will log in with Xano, and if this action is successful, this event on login success will be triggered. So now what we can do is back on our instance, so on our dedicated login page here, we could have a workflow on the component, a new workflow, and instead of, it's not when the user clicks on the component or when the mouse enters or leaves the component, it's on login success. So when the component emits this on login success event, then what we want to do is we want to change page. So we want to go to the login modal page, for example. Now, if I go to preview mode and test this, if I sign in, you'll see I was authenticated properly and redirected to this login modal page. Now I can do something similar, but instead of changing page after the login, I want to close a modal. So let's say that here I have a login button, and when the user clicks on it, I want to display login modal. So here I will change a variable value that comes with a modal. So first I will add a modal here, include the variable, so modal open. So now I have this modal here. It's hidden by default, but on my login button, I can say change this variable value modal open to true. So now when the user clicks on login, this modal is opened. And on my modal, inside my modal, I could drop my login form. So I could drop it here. And I can get, let's say I want to get rid of this because I don't need it. And actually I don't need that either. Okay, so now I have my login form component inside a modal. And when the login is successful, so on login success, I want to change the variable value of the modal back to false. So let me first log out. I'm gonna log out here. And we can see here that I'm currently logged in. So now let me call this log out. And if I go to preview mode, I will log out. There we go. So now I can log back in. So I'll click on login. It opens the modal. I type in my credentials. And now when I sign in, instead of changing page, it will close the modal. There we go. So I can use the same login form component, the one that I have here and here. This is the one that in my library I can find here. And if I want to add it, I can find here. So I can use the same login form, but change the behavior when the login is successful. To go one step further with component events, we could play around with the value of the event. So let's go back to editing mode inside our component and on the login workflow. Remember here we triggered the on login success event and we added text. So we said we could leave this empty. We could also add text. So let me show you the difference between when we add text or not. So here we'll start by adding text. And on the instance of the login form, I will edit the workflow. In addition to changing page, I will change a variable value. So for example, update event info. And here I'll create a global variable, so a variable that's accessible throughout my project, and call it event info. And because I added text as the event value, I will have a text variable. Let's create this and make sure that it's this variable that we update and that we update it with the value of our on login success event. So now if I go to preview mode and I look at my variables, my global variables, I see the event info variable is empty by default. And if I log in successfully, so if I trigger the on login success event, it will say, yippee, you successfully logged in. Because on my component, so on the workflow in my form container, I included this text: UPU successfully logged in when the event was triggered. Now let's leave this empty. I will close this. I will log out. And here, instead of a text variable, I will have an object variable. And on my form now, I will say the same thing. So I am updating the event info variable, but now it's an object. I can see this with the curly brackets, and it's still bound to the event of on login success. So now if I log in, it just says null because I didn't add any information. So depending on your use case, you may want to pass through information in the event. You may want on your component to provide information about what the value of the event is. To display, for example, a specific error message or success message or whatever. That's it. That's how you can emit and react to a component event in WeWeb.